Hello, welcome to Chapter 8 of Safe People, Part 2. I'm reading from Safe People by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, and the copyright is 1995. Okay, so we are reading Chapter 8, Part 2, and I am reading the second part of the second portion of the first part. So realize that you were created to need, and that even God himself experiences longings, as Christ did when he mourned over his unrepentant people. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Matthew 23:37. Need is a good part of you. Begin to observe the devaluing things you say and think. Ask friends for feedback on your devaluing. You may be surprised. Observe the patterns. Do you more when you really want something? A friend of mine recently was auditioning for a church play. He loved acting and had an intense desire to be in the program. Yet when he told me about it, he said, "Well, it's just a church play." Often the intensity of our devaluation is a marker of the intensity of our need. Work on bringing your needs to relationship. Most devaluers have tremendously deep fears of being without and impoverished. Find safe people who can help you experience your needs without being hurt. Perfectionism. Mark is a walking dilemma, one of those people who's hard to figure out. He is an unmarried Christian professional man with no horrible problems like drugs, sex, or compulsive addictions. He's an intelligent, athletic, and good looking. He's responsible and loves God. Mark is 45 years old. He has no friends, safe or otherwise. He is very, very alone. How does that picture come together? On the outside, it doesn't make sense. A guy with Mark's qualities should have a rich, active relational life. But when you understand the power of perfectionism, it makes perfect sense. For Mark is a perfectionist and has only recently seen the devastating consequences of this trait. Sometimes we make jokes about our perfectionism. I looked in the mirror and got depressed about being 3 pounds overweight. The genuine article, however, can be much more serious. Perfectionism can be a major cause of depression, destructive behaviors, and divorce. What is perfectionism? Simply put, it's an inability to tolerate faults. Perfectionists have a phobia about imperfections and blemishes in themselves, in other people, and in the world. They spend enormous amounts of time trying to create a perfect world, running in futility from the realities of sin, age, loss, and cellulite. The perfectionist tries to live in the land of ideals. He sees life the way it should be. People should treat each other right. I should be a productive, successful person. Fairness and equality should rule. Then he sees the huge chasm between the land of ideals and the land of the real. For example, he cannot live up to his expectations of himself, or he is let down by someone important to him. And he has great difficulty accepting where he lives, the land of the real. So he tries to change his permanent address to ideal land again. On a deeper level, the perfectionist lives under the law. He is in bondage to a demand that says if you do right, you'll be loved. And that is exactly what the law does say. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it. James 2:10. It's a terrible tightrope to walk, knowing that one slip, just one, brings condemnation and hatred on yourself. While having ideals and goals is good, when our goals become demands, minimum standards, we're being perfectionistic. There are two ways that perfectionism can cut us off from safe relationships. First, perfectionism disqualifies us from connection. The impossible standard of who I should be towers over me like a threatening cloud. I'm constantly and acutely reminded of my failings, sins, and weaknesses. I see all of my badness and all of its badness. And I understand the condemnation of the law. I feel utterly unloved and alone. Knowing my badness cuts me off. At this point, the perfectionist begins to develop a grandiose view of his failures and a minimal view of God's love. He thinks at some levels, no one could love the real me. It's too negative, too ugly, too bad. And he isolates, protecting himself from his deep conviction that anyone who saw the real him would turn and walk away from him. Second, perfectionism disqualifies others from connection. Sometimes the condemning, judging spotlight of the perfectionist gets turned from himself to his relationships, and is just as stark and unforgiving. He will see others' blemishes and be blinded to any other lovable parts of them. He will obsess on fixing the other person to make her right, or he'll simply leave the relationship. The perfectionist is often critical of others, although he doesn't mean to be. Often he's simply projecting his own deep self-hatred on others and attempting to relieve the pressure a little. Often the perfectionist feels entitlement, the need to be treated specially, not as another ordinary person. When you are entitled, you may refuse to reach out because the other person doesn't meet your expectations of specialness. Here are some things you might do if you have this bent or tendency. You might disqualify a friend before really getting to know her. You might be enormously hurt and disappointed when someone fails you and withdraw. You might have impossible standards for people to meet. You might become so self-condemning that you avoid connections. You might have a strong string of failed relationships behind you and simply give up because the failures hurt so much. If we're playing This Is Your Life in this section, there are several things you can do. Number one, understand that you've turned ideals from goals into demands. Number two, begin to study what the cross actually accomplished. We can both be loved and flawed at the same time. Find out, number three, where you learn to be a perfectionist. It could have been a conditional relationship, a perfectionist parent, or a legalistic religious background. Number four, seek out people to confess your faults to. Note, these must be people who also admit their faults and have no need to judge you. Number five, begin to allow others to both know and love you. Most perfectionists can't do both. They either feel loved and unknown or known and unloved. Remember that the antidote to perfectionism isn't being good, it's being loved. Number six, give up your sense of entitlement. Number seven, begin to do what God does with these issues. Take your needs off the cross and nail your perfectionism and isolation up there. Merger wishes. If this sounds like a familiar term, then you probably read chapter 6, or you remember me reading it. Why do I choose unsafe relationships? This dynamic also plays an important role in why we choose to isolate ourselves from others. A merger wish is basically love minus boundaries. When someone else possesses a trait that we don't have, we are inclined to blur our identity with theirs in order to help us feel better about ourselves and to gain access to that trait. Merging also keeps us from feeling alone. Many people fall in love, get married, develop platonic friendships, and go into business arrangements, all fueled by merger wishes. They will see a creative quality, a loving quality, or an aggressive quality in the other and do anything to be with that person. Sometimes the merger will feel so excited to be with the mergee that she seems intoxicated, swimming in the pool of love with the beloved. Now, in the new relationships, this is common, and there's nothing wrong with it. That is, as long as you don't make character decisions based on it. How does this relate to choosing nobody? It does sound strange because you'd think that a merger wish would drive people to meld with one person after another, and it does. Some people spend their entire lives trying to fulfill their addictive urge to be totally enmeshed with another person. But there are also times when just the opposite happens. Vicky picked up the phone and dialed. When she heard Rick's voice on the other end, she hung up. She ate another bowl of chocolate chip ice cream. Then her courage bolstered somewhat. She called again. But this time she disconnected before Rick answered. Finally, Vicky hung up even before she finished dialing. She returned to her bowl. It was going to be another 1-gallon night. Now, this scene, familiar to many of us, may look like devaluation. It may look like being unable to need, but it isn't. It was a classic case of merger wish-induced isolation. Here's what was going through Vicky's mind as she struggled with calling her boyfriend. First of all, I want the connection with Rick to be wonderful. I want us to have no conflicts or misunderstandings. I want him to understand me and him totally. I want Rick to comfort me and help me feel better. But along with these longings, Vicky also had these disturbing thoughts. What if he's in a bad mood? What if he doesn't understand me the way I need it? What if there's conflict? What if he tries and I'm still disappointed in his empathy? What if it becomes undeniably apparent that Rick and I are two separate people? People who struggle with merger wishes are sometimes terrified and discouraged by the realities of separateness. People disagree with us, don't understand us, have to call us back because they're drying their hair. And the merging person basically comes to the conclusions it's better to be without than to risk the reality of feeling separate. If I'm going to be abandoned, I don't need the added pain of being with someone. There is a problem in separateness. To the merger, separateness doesn't feel like freedom, but total abandonment. Separateness becomes the worst kind of isolation to the merger. That's why they frequently try to think up things to say when there's a silence in a conversation. The separateness is just too painful. Back to the merge. If this is a struggle of yours, you may have, like Vicky, given up on relationships. You may have been disappointed too many times and felt abandoned. Here are some action steps to take to get you back on the road to choosing connections. I want to say something here that is not in the book, okay? Like I like to give my little input once in a while. If you have merger wishes, this is also part of borderline personality disorder. When you see a borderline copy someone and try to be like that person, that's merger wishes. But often you'll see them also reject the person because they're afraid or they think that the other person isn't going to meet their needs or they fear that other person not being there for them or abandoning them. So that's the come close, get away thing. I want to be just like you. I want to sound like you. I want to look like you. I want your talents. I want everything you have. And then on the flip side, I don't want you near me because you're going to hurt me. You're not going to meet my needs. How could you be like that to me? And pushing you away. That's borderline. I hate you. Don't leave me type of stuff. So this is a merger wish type thing. So number one, realize your trait is probably the result of a relationship in which you were abandoned and made helpless. People who struggle with merger wishes often have been punished for being aggressive and reinforced for being compliant. Number two, begin to make separateness your friend. Distinguish separateness from abandonment and aloneness from loneliness. Understand how letting others be separate frees you up to make choices yourself. Number three, find people with whom you can practice setting boundaries. Quite often, boundary work helps us love separateness, choices, and our own power to take care of ourselves and do God's work. Number four, be honest with safe people about the merger wish. Unsafe people will move away from you or exploit your needs. Safe people have good boundaries and will stay connected to you, helping you reach out for the love you need. And as you're nurtured by separate relationships, you will outgrow the need to constantly swim in love. Separateness will no longer feel like abandonment. Passivity. I once stood by and watched a friend's entire life go down the drain. It took several years, but he finally lost everything and everyone he loved. Kevin was one of the most laid-back guys I'd ever met. Nothing was ever important enough to galvanize him to some kind of action. I always wondered what would happen if you discharged a 38 next to him. My fantasy was that he'd slowly turn his head and murmur, "Sounds like a Smith & Wesson." Kevin was great to watch sunsets with. I enjoyed taking walks with him and just hanging out. But Kevin, under the guise of being easygoing, was passive, and it hurt him. I watched him lose promotion after promotion in his job because the other guys always had more fire in the belly. I watched him lose friends as more active people would get tired of being with him while he just bead. It was hardest to watch his wife Lois and their kids gradually move him out of their hearts. They'd try to provoke him to take some sort of initiative, but he'd just smile and read the paper. Finally, Lois left and took the kids with her, and he didn't put up a fight. Kevin was the nicest guy in the world, but he never took stands, never disagreed, never confronted, and never reached out. Actually, I did a little more than watch. I'd tell him, "Kevin, I'm concerned that you're going to lose Lois and the kids if you don't make some attempt to be there more with them." And he'd smile and nod and say, "That's a really good point. I need to think about that." Not surprisingly, nothing would happen. Kevin is like a lot of people, maybe more severe than most. To be passive is to avoid action for various reasons. Passive people are patient. They don't mind waiting for things. They believe that good things will happen for those who wait. And they do that better than anyone. There can be several causes for passivity, such as a wish to be rescued from their problems by a caring person, a fear of loss if they reach out to someone, a fear of punishment if they take action, a fear of failure, a fear of success. Sometimes passive people spiritualize their condition. They call it handing it over to God. They'll wait for God to do things to help them, such as find them a job, find them a mate, solve relational problems, find them a support group, heal emotional pain. This is an unbiblical view. God never reinforces passivity. He always, sorry, he always presents our growth for as a partnership with him. He does what only God can do, and we do our job. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Philippians 2:12. To avoid responsibility is never a spiritual act. Warning, passivity is hazardous to your health. If you're passive, you may find that it's hard to reach out and take initiative in relationships. You may wait by the phone, hoping someone will call. You may wait for someone at work to befriend you. You may wait for a church member to greet and welcome you. There's nothing wrong with desiring these kinds of encounters, but remember that you'll need to do your part too. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. Hebrews 10:38 says that. Don't let life pass you by as you shrink back. Don't let passivity create a mummy-like survival-type existence for you. Find people who want to help you enter the world, encourage you to take action, and support your attempts to regain control of your life and relationships. Conclusion. Odds are in these last two chapters, you've seen yourself in a few areas. There are reasons you choose to get into unsafe relationships. There are also reasons you avoid developing relationships at all. Now that you've understood the problem, it's time to look at the solution. We've stressed over and over that the cure for bad relationships can only be found in developing good relationships with safe people. Therefore, in part 3, Safe People, we will help you understand what safe people are, why we need them, where to find them, and most important of all, how to become a safe person yourself. Finally, we will look at some of your less than perfect relationships and discuss whether you should repair them or replace them. So next time we will be talking about part 3, chapter 9. What are safe people? Okay, so this should be pretty interesting next time around. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and listening to chapter 8 from Safe People. See you next time.